The first sign that the sky had been bought and sold was the rain falling sideways in Karachi for 9 days without stopping. Commander Roya Jaskaran heard about it on the cargo deck of Gamma 1, 240 kilometers above the Earth, while she was eating a cold paratha she had smuggled up from leave. The galley was empty except for her and a maintenance tech who was pretending not to listen. The news ticker on the wall ran in 3 languages and none of them softened it. Bangladesh was gone in the sense that maps go gone, not erased, but redrawn underwater, half of Florida, most of the Netherlands. The Maldives were a memory with a flag still flying over open ocean. Glaciers that had taken 4 million years to build were sliding into the sea in 3 weeks. Her mother was in Karachi, had been in Karachi. The line had gone dead on the 4th day of the rain. The satellite link from the family compound in Defense Phase 6, wiped out by what the news called weather-related infrastructure cascade, and what she called, in her own head, the slow drowning of the only place she had ever been a child. Her mother was 81. Mother did not like to leave the house. Her mother had a small green parakeet named Mithu, who had bitten Roya on the finger when she was 6 years old and who Roya assumed was now also drowned, although she did not allow herself to think about that for very long, because she had to keep working and there was no use in thinking about a parakeet. Roya finished the paratha. She wiped her fingers on her jumpsuit, the one with her mother's initials stitched inside the collar in green thread, A.J., Amina Jaskaran, in the kind of careful Devanagari script her mother had learned as a girl from a woman in Lahore, who had taught her embroidery and the names of every flower in the Punjab, and she went to find out who had decided to drown her planet. Himalayan weather relay, General Norton said when she reached the bridge. He was a small man with a big voice, and he used the voice now because the bridge was full of people pretending they weren't afraid. Station 42. Bhutanese side, 1,000 feet. We lost contact 11 hours ago. Last transmission was screaming. Screaming what? Just screaming, Commander. She nodded slowly. Outside the viewport, the earth turned blue and white and wrong. There was too much blue. The white was in the wrong places. Who's on the ground? Nobody, that's why I'm sending you. She took her partner. Frank Pulaski was 44 years old, built like a refrigerator, wearing a coat. And he had been her co-pilot for 9 years, and her friend for 11. He carried a steel hip flask everywhere he went, and inside the flask was tea, because he had quit drinking the year his daughter was born. And he liked the weight of the thing in his pocket. He was the only person on Gamma 1 who could make her laugh in a real way, the kind that hurt your ribs. Bhutan, Frank said, reading the briefing on the descent. I was supposed to be in Bhutan once. Honeymoon didn't happen. Why? Because I married a woman who was afraid of altitude. He grinned. Funny, eh? Astronaut's wife. That's not funny, Frank. It's a little funny. The shuttle dropped them in a valley of bone-white snow under a sky the color of an old bruise. The wind was a constant low howl, like a wounded animal hiding under the world. Roya stepped out first. The cold hit her like an open hand. She had been on Mars. She had been in the cold spots of the lunar shadow where instruments froze in 11 seconds. She had never been anywhere that felt as cold as a place that was supposed to be warm and wasn't. The Himalayan winter was an old cold, a cold that had been there longer than the country it had been parceled into. And there was something in it that did not like being witnessed. They had a Sherpa-class guide assigned to them by the local government, a man named Tenzin who was 60 years old and had walked these passes since he was a child, and who looked at the broken weather station from a kilometer away and said, "Arog," very quietly, "Something wrong here, sir, madam. Something wrong with the wrongness." "What does that mean?" Frank said. Tenzin pointed at the snow. "No animals, 9 kilometers, no animals. Not even a marmot. Snow leopards leave tracks even when you don't see them. There are no tracks." They also had a civilian, Lisa Brennan, 28, climatologist out of Reykjavik, attached to the mission by the UN because the UN wanted a scientific witness. Fiancé had been the senior tech at Station 42. She had not been told this was a rescue. She had been told it was an inspection. She figured it out before they landed and said nothing about it, which Roya respected more than she would have respected tears. The station, when they reached it, was not destroyed. That was the first thing wrong. It was disassembled. Not blown up, not burned, not collapsed by avalanche. Disassembled. Panels lifted off and stacked. Wires coiled. The main reactor pulled out of its housing and set almost gently, in the snow 10 meters away. As if something very large had taken the building apart to understand it, and had not bothered to put it back together because it had learned what it needed. Inside the bodies. 6 of them. None of them had marks. Their suits were intact. Their faces were locked in expressions Roya had seen exactly once before, on a man who had decompressed in a vacuum and tried to scream. But these men had not decompressed. They had simply somehow stopped. Lisa looked at one of them for a long time. Her face did not change. "That's him," she said. "On the left, with the wedding band." Frank turned away. He did that sometimes when he didn't trust his face. Roya stayed. She knelt by the dead man, Henrik, whose name she had just learned in the worst possible way. And she looked at him properly, because she felt that someone ought to. He had been perhaps 35. He had freckles. His hands were the hands of a man who tinkered with old radios on his days off. Fingertips scarred from a soldering iron, nails clipped short. There was a paperback book in the pouch on his chest. She did not look at the title, did not feel she had the right. "Madam," Tenzin said from the doorway. His voice was a whisper. "Madam, please, come look." They came outside, on the lee side of the station. The snow had been pressed flat over an area the size of a basketball court, and in the center of that flatness was a footprint. One footprint, 2.5 meters long, 5 toes. The depth of it in the hard-packed snow suggested a weight that should not have been able to walk. "The Yeti," Tenzin said. "My grandfather said that Yeti were real. He said they were not animals. He said they were watchers." He looked up at the sky. A star or a satellite was burning very steadily in the late afternoon. He said one day they would stop watching. The Aetia came down out of the rocks an hour later. There were 8 of them. They were 3 meters tall and broad as doorways, and their bodies were covered in hair the deep blue of a winter sea at dusk. Their faces were almost human. Almost, except for the eyes, were set too wide, and which had no whites at all, just a deep gold pupil floating in a deeper gold iris. They wore armor that looked grown rather than forged. Plates of something like dark chitin laid over the blue fur, and they carried weapons that hummed in a frequency that made Roya's teeth ache. They did not charge. They walked. They walked the way a man walks toward a dog he intends to put down. Without hurry, without anger, because the outcome is already known. Frank raised his rifle and Roya put her hand on the barrel and pushed it down. 8 of them, she said quietly. "We have 3 rifles, don't." "Roya, don't, Frank." The lead Atia stopped 6 paces away. It looked at them one by one. When it reached Tenzin, it tilted its head and made a sound like a low bell being struck underwater. Tenzin sank to his knees in the snow and began to weep without sound. Roya never asked him afterward what he had heard. She thought she knew. She thought the idea had spoken to him in his grandfather's voice. Then the lead one looked at her. Its mouth moved. The sound that came out was not in any language, she knew, but a small device on its collar translated. In a voice that was patient and almost kind. "You are smaller than I expected," it said. "Come, we will explain, then we will decide." They were taken under the mountain. There was a city under the mountain. Roya had stood on the surface of the moon, and she had watched a star nursery from 40 light minutes away, Gamma 1's telescope, and she had not been prepared for the city under the mountain. It went down. It went down further than seemed possible. Crystalline corridors lit from within, ribbed with that same dark chitin, ceilings so high the breath of the Itia made low clouds near the top. The air smelled of ozone and cold pine and something animal, something old. The floor under their boots was not stone and not metal, but something in between, warm in the way a sleeping body is warm, and Roya understood after a while that the city itself was alive in some sense she did not have the vocabulary for, that the chitin was not built, grown, that the lights were not lights but a kind of phosphorescence the walls exuded when Atia walked past, that the whole vast hive was a single slow organism. The Atia lived inside the way coral lives inside a reef. They passed other Atia. Some were taller than Vorshan. Some were smaller. The smaller ones, Roya understood after a moment with a small sick lurch, were children. Children 3 meters tall with the same wide gold eyes, walking in small groups behind teachers, glancing at the humans with curiosity and not malice. One of them, perhaps 4 feet of curiosity in a sea blue pelt, broke away from its line and ran up to Frank and touched his coat. Just touched it, the cuff of his sleeve, and then ran back to its group, laughing in a sound that the translator did not bother to render because it did not need to. Children laughing sounds like children laughing in any language. Frank looked at Roya. His face was strange. "Don't," she said quietly. "I'm not. Think it. I'm not Roya." But he was, and she was. They both were. And that was the first crack in the war, although neither of them named it that then or ever. The lead Adia was named, as best the translator could render it, Vortian of the Long Ice. It walked them through the city without restraints, because restraints were not necessary. There were Itia everywhere, and the smallest of them was twice Roya's size. "You are wondering why we did not kill you," Vortian said. It walked with its hands clasped behind its back, like a professor. "It is because we wish you to understand. It is important to us that you understand. We are not cruel. We have never been cruel. Cruelty is what small things do when they are afraid. We are not afraid." "Then what are you doing to our planet?" Lisa said. Her voice was level. Roya did not know how she did it. Vortian stopped walking. It turned and looked at Lisa with what might have been respect. "We are preparing it," it said. "Our world is dying. Our sun has begun to swell. We have perhaps 3 of your centuries before our oceans boil. We have searched, and we have found one world within reach that has the correct mass, the correct distance from a stable star, the correct chemistry. This one. Yours. You can have the poles," Frank said. "Lot of room at the poles. We don't even live there." "You are kind," Vortian said, and the translator made it sound as if it meant it. "But our bodies cannot tolerate temperatures above your freezing point for long. We require the entire world frozen. We are sorry. It is not personal. We have studied your species. You are clever. We did not expect that. Expected mammals." "What are we then?" Roya said. The Atia looked at her. Its gold eyes were steady. "You are mammals," it said. "You are also something else. We have not decided yet." What? They were shown a room. The room was a viewing chamber. On its curved wall, in moving images so clear they hurt to look at, was the future of Earth. The polar caps gone, the oceans risen by 60 meters, the equatorial cities drowned, the survivors driven inland onto a shrinking band of habitable land. Then the second phase. Atmospheric processors at the poles, machines the size of mountains breathing out cold, the oceans freezing from the top down, the new ice, the Adia descending in their thousands. Cities of dark chitin rising on the bones of London and Tokyo and Lagos. The last humans crowded along the equator, in small reserves, kept the way one might keep an interesting beetle in a jar. "You will not all die," Shin said gently. "We will preserve some of you. Your art is interesting. Your music is surprising. We have heard your music. We do not understand it, but we have heard it. And we wish to keep some of it. Do you understand? We are offering you a kind of immortality." Frank made a sound in his throat. Roya knew that sound. It was the sound he made before he punched a man at a bar in Lima 8 years ago, the time the man had spit on a waitress. "Frank, I know. I know you know. Just, I know." Lisa Brennan stepped forward. She was a small woman, and she had her hands in the pockets of her parka. And she looked up at Vortian of the Long Ice. And she said, in a voice that did not shake, "My fiancé is dead because of you. He had a name. His name was Henrik. He liked old jazz. He could not whistle. He was teaching himself to whistle when you killed him. You will not take this planet." Vortian looked down at her for a long moment. Then it said, "Great delicacy. Yes, we will." That night, if it was night this far down, they put the 3 humans and the Sherpa in a long stone room with no door, only an opening, because they were not afraid of escape. They left them food. The food was a kind of moss in cold water, and it tasted, Frank said, like a wet rug, and they ate it anyway. Tenzin had not spoken since the surface. Now he spoke. "My grandfather," he said, "told me a story when I was a boy. He said the mountain was a god and the god was sleeping, but the god could be woken. He said if you stood at the right place on the right day and you sang the right song, the mountain would open." "Tenzin," Roya said. "He was a mad old man, my grandfather. He drank too much barley wine. But he showed me the place. He showed me the song." Tenzin's eyes were very dark in the half-light. "We are very deep, madam. We are very deep under the mountain. But I am thinking, perhaps the mountain is also above us. And perhaps the mountain does not love what is inside it. Frank looked at Roya. Roya looked at Frank. What are you saying, Tenzin? Roya said carefully. I am saying, said the old man, that I have been listening while we have walked here. The ice above us is moving. There has been a great melt. The pressure has been building for many weeks. There is a fault, I think. A fault in the rock. If a man knew where to strike, if a man had something to strike with, we don't have anything to strike with, Frank said. You have a reactor, Tenzin said. What reactor? The one outside the station, sir. They pulled it out and they left it. They do not understand what it is. To them it is a child's toy, but I have read your manuals while we walked. You speak too much in your sleep, sir. I know what a fusion battery does when it is not contained. There was a very long silence in the cold stone room. Then Roya started to laugh. She did not mean to. It came up out of her like a hiccup, and once it started she could not stop it for a minute, and when she finally got herself back she wiped her eyes and she said, Tenzin, Tenzin, my friend, you are a terrible old man. Yes, madam. You are a terrible, terrible old man and I love you. Yes, madam. Now please tell me how to make the reactor explode. They escaped because the Itia were not afraid of them. That was the only reason, and it was reason enough. The opening had no door because doors were not necessary. The guards were 2 corridors away because 2 corridors was sufficient. Roya, who weighed 48 kilos, and who had once crawled through a ventilation shaft on Gamma 1 during a hull breach to steal a coolant line with chewing gum in prayer, slipped out of the opening on her belly, while Frank made loud snoring noises behind her. She found a maintenance shaft. She climbed it for 40 minutes. She came up in a service alcove behind a row of those humming chitin weapons, took one off the rack, fumbled with it for a moment, and shot the first idea she saw in the back of the head. It went down without a sound. She took the keys off its belt. Although they were not keys, they were a small flat stone that hummed when she held it, and she went back down the shaft. She let Frank and Lisa and Tenzin out. They went up. They went up through the city of the idea. Roya led with the humming gun. Frank brought up the rear with another one they took off a sentry. Lisa and Tenzin walked between. They did not run, because running attracts attention. They walked. They walked the way Vorshin had walked toward them, without hurry, without anger, as if the outcome were already known. Twice they passed Adia in the corridors, and the Adia did not look at them, because the Itia did not expect to see escaping humans, and the brain sees what it expects. They reached the surface at sunrise. The wreck of Station 42 was where they had left it. The fusion reactor was a steel cylinder the size of a coffee table, buried in the snow. Frank knelt beside it. All right, he said. Tenzin, talk to me. The old man knelt beside him, put his hand on the reactor. My grandfather sang a song, he said softly. On the days the mountain felt heavy. He said the mountain liked the song. I will sing it now. You do what you must do, sir. I will sing. It is all right, sir. I am old. My wife is dead. My son is in Delhi and does not call. The mountain is my friend. He smiled a small smile. And I would like to see what happens when the mountain opens. Roya said, Tenzin, you're coming with us. No, madam. Someone must stay and hold the reactor in place when it goes. Otherwise the blast will spread upward, not downward. You know this is true. He looked at her with great kindness. Madam, please, let me have this one thing. She could not answer. She nodded. Frank worked on the reactor for 20 minutes. He pulled out the containment rods. He shorted the cooling loop. He rerouted the magnetic bottle through a coil he ripped out of the station's comm array. When he was done, the reactor was humming in a way that made the snow around it begin to steam. 8 minutes, he said. Maybe 9. After that it pops. Go, Tenzin said. Frank stood up. He looked at the old man for a long moment. Then he took the steel hip flask out of his pocket. He unscrewed the cap. He took a sip tea, cold tea, the way he liked it. And he handed the flask to Tenzin. For the road, old man. Tenzin took the flask. He sniffed it. He laughed. This is just tea, sir, I know. You are a terrible man, sir. I know, Tenzin sipped. He closed his eyes. He sat down beside the humming reactor, and he began in a voice cracked and thin and beautiful to sing. They ran. They ran across the snow with the wind tearing at them, and the song behind them, and the sky bruised purple overhead. And they reached the shuttle, and they got the door open, and they got inside, and Roya hit the ignition, and they lifted off. and they were 3 kilometers out and climbing when the mountain opened. It did not explode. That was what Roya would remember. It did not explode the way a bomb explodes. It opened. The whole north face of the peak lifted, slowly like a man taking off a hat, hand. Underneath was a column of white light that went up into the sky for what looked like forever, and then the snowpack. Millions of tons of snowpack that had been waiting for this for 10,000 years. Let go. The avalanche took the city of the Itia and folded it into the rock. They saw the song of it before they heard it. The shock wave rolled out across the Himalayas, and the white plumes rose, and the peaks moved, actually moved, settling into new shapes. And, somewhere under all of that, an old man was singing his grandfather's song to a mountain he had called his friend. The shuttle climbed. Roya did not cry. She had a job to do. Lisa Brennan behind her was making a small, steady sound that was not crying either but something else, something more private. And Frank was sitting in the co-pilot seat with the empty flask in his hands, turning it over and over. "That was one base," he said. "Wasn't it?" "Yes," Roya said. "They have more." "Yes. Where? I don't know yet, but I'm going to." They docked with Gamma 1 6 hours later. They brought back samples, a chitin plate, a humming gun, the small flat stone that was not quite a key. They brought back, also, a recording Lisa had made on her field unit while they were inside the city. 3 minutes of Vorshen of the long ice, talking about the dying sun and the world it intended to take. The xenolinguists worked on it for 2 days. The astronomers worked on it for 2 hours. They came back with an answer none of them liked. "Callisto," General Norton said. His voice was tired. He had aged 5 years in a week. "The main base is on Callisto, Jupiter's moon. They've been there for at least 11 years. We never saw them because they're under the ice." "How many of them?" Roya asked. "We don't know. Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more. The signal we're picking up off Callisto is..." "It's a city, Commander. It's a city the size of New York under 60 kilometers of ice. And the polar caps, still melting. Whatever the relay station was doing, it had partners. There are others. The atmospheric processing isn't going to stop. They've already laid the seed. In 9 months, Earth's average temperature drops 20 degrees and stays there. In 18 months, we're a snowball." He looked at her. "You're going to Callisto, Commander." "Yes, sir. It's a one-way mission. I want you to know that." "Yes, sir. You can refuse." "No, sir," she said. "I can't." They gave her 3 ships, Hawkmoth, Kestrel, and Albatross. Frank piloted Kestrel. Lisa Brennan, who was not military and who had refused every order to stay behind, rode in Albatross with the science team. Roya took Hawkmoth and the lead. 41 crew across the 3 ships, 12 Marines, 3 xenolinguists. The rest were engineers, gunners, medics, and 1 cook who had once worked in a brasserie in Lyon and who made a coq au vin on the 3rd night out that Frank Pulaski cried at because it was the best meal he had eaten in his life and because he knew it might be the last. The transit took 11 months. 11 months in the dark. 11 months of training in 0G, of war games against simulated Adia, staring at the slowly growing speck of Jupiter, and the smaller speck beside it, and trying to imagine the city under the ice. Roya did not sleep well. None of them did. Frank started doing push-ups in the cargo bay, hundreds of them, every day. Lisa Brennan taught herself to whistle. She got good at it. She would whistle old standards in the mess hall. Henrik's standards. The songs he had been learning to whistle when the Atia had killed him. And the crew would stop eating and listen, and then go back to eating, and nobody ever told her to stop. The cook was a woman named Adele Marchant, 51 years old, had pulled out of retirement for this mission. Because she had once cooked for an Antarctic deep station crew for 2 years without breaking, and the brass thought she might be able to keep 41 people from losing their minds in the dark. She made coq au vin on the 3rd night. She made cassolet on the 7th. She made a small lamb tagine for Roya, alone, on the night they crossed the orbit of Mars, because she had read Roya's file, and she knew where Roya's mother had been from, and she had a small tin of saffron in her personal effects that she had been saving for 40 years, and she said, when Roya tried to thank her, "Just eat. Just eat, Commander. The eating is the thank you." Roya ate. She thought about her mother. She thought about the parakeet. She thought about the green thread inside the collar of her jumpsuit. And the woman in Lahore, who had taught her mother the names of every flower in Punjab. And she thought about whether any of those flowers were still alive anywhere on Earth. And she ate the lamb tagine, all of it. She thanked Adele Marchant without words, by eating, and Adele Marchant understood. On month 9 they got their first clear scan of Callisto. The shield was on the ice side. A dome of energy 50 kilometers across, anchored at 4 points around the city, under the ice. And it was the same humming frequency as the weapons the ITIA had carried. And it was, as Frank said quietly, looking at the readout. Tighter than a drum, Roy. We hit that thing with everything we have, and we don't even scratch it. They'll pop us like grapes. So we don't hit it, Roya said. Then what do we do? She had been thinking about this for 11 months. She had been thinking about it since the mountain had opened. She said, we do what Tenzin did. The asteroid belt was 400 million kilometers behind them. They had passed through its outer fringe 2 months back. Callisto orbited Jupiter, and Jupiter had its own captured swarm. Small bodies, mostly ice and rock, in long looping orbits around the gas giant. Roya had the navigators chart them. There were 18 large enough to matter. There were 3 large enough to matter a great deal. One of them, 30-kilometer chunk of dirty ice and nickel iron, the crew nicknamed the Anvil, was on a trajectory that would take it within 2 million kilometers of Callisto in 19 days. They had 3 ships. They had 41 people. They had a finite amount of fuel, and an infinite amount of distance, and a planet at home that was, at that moment, watching Greenland slide into the sea in real time. They went to work. It took 6 days to match velocity with the Anvil. It took 2 more to land. Roya walked on the surface of an asteroid that had never been touched by anything but starlight. And she did not have time to think about that. She would later regret. The sky above her was not a sky. It was the void with Jupiter hung in it like a swollen orange lantern, and the surface, under her boots, was a black-gray crust that crunched without sound, and her own breathing inside her helmet was the loudest thing in the universe. She set a flag. She had not been ordered to. She did it anyway, because somebody ought to, and because there was a small paper flag in her thigh pocket that her crew had signed in the mess hall on month 4, and she planted it in the dirty ice. And she said a sentence she did not let anyone else hear, and then she went back to work. They spent 3 days drilling. The drills were Soviet pattern, old design, reliable in a way that newer tools were not, and they screamed through the nickel iron at a rate of 40 centimeters an hour. Frank ran 2 of the drill teams. Lisa Brennan ran a third, because she had asked to, and because she was the only civilian on the ship who had ever used heavy machinery, and because Roya had decided that she would not refuse Lisa Brennan anything within reason ever again. They drilled 18 holes in a pattern that looked, on Frank's napkin, like the constellation Orion if Orion had been drawn by a drunk. They placed 18 fusion charges, not the small reactor charges they had used in the Himalayas, but the big ones. The colony seed charges that were meant to crack open the core of a dead moon to find water. Placed them in a pattern Frank had worked out on the back of that same napkin in the mess hall. Pattern that was supposed to nudge 30 kilometers of rock and ice into a corridor 400 kilometers wide, which was, frankly, like asking a man to thread a needle while wearing oven mitts in the dark. On the last day, before they lifted off, Frank stood on the surface of the Anvil, and he took the steel hip flask out of his suit pouch. He had brought it, of course he had brought it. He would have brought it through a black hole. And he held it up in his gloved hand and he said, the open comm channel so that all 41 of them could hear. For Tenzin. Who taught us how to break a mountain? For Tenzin, 40 voices answered. Then they lifted off. The charges went. The Anvil split. Not into 2 pieces, into 7. 6 of them tumbled off into deep space, lost forever. The 7th, the largest, a chunk of nickel iron the size of a small city, drifted, with a new and gentle velocity, toward Callisto. It took 6 more days for the chunk to reach the shield. When it hit at 12 kilometers a second. The shield held. For a moment. For one impossible moment, the humming dome of Atian energy bowed inward like a soap bubble being pressed by a thumb, and Roya, watching from Hawkmoth's bridge a million kilometers away, thought, we have failed. Have all failed. The old man sang a song for nothing. Then, the shield burst. It did not break. It did not crack. It burst like a balloon, in a flash of light that left an afterimage on the viewport. And the chunk of nickel iron, slowed but not stopped, kept going, and struck the ice of Callisto at 6 kilometers a second. And the ice opened the way a wound opens, and underneath was the city. Then they went in. Ships. 41 people. Roya took Hawkmoth in low over the broken ice, and the city of the Adia was below her, exposed to the void, its dark chitin towers exposed to vacuum, and the Adia inside were running. She had not expected that. She had not expected them to run. They were running. "They're not soldiers," Lisa Brennan said over the comm. Her voice was wondering. "Roya, they're not soldiers. Look at them. They're builders. They're scientists. They sent the soldiers to the fountain. They didn't expect us to come here." "They're going to die," Frank said flatly. "All of them, Roya. They're going to all die when this ice cracks open. There are children down there." Roya looked at the readout. She looked at the broken city. She looked at the small fleeing shapes. She closed her eyes for 1 second. She opened them. "Get the Marines down there," she said. Tell them we are not the idea. Tell them we are taking prisoners. We are taking prisoners, Frank. We are taking as many of them as we can fit. And then we are going to disable their atmospheric processors, and we are going home. Are we clear?" A pause. Then his voice, quiet and steady. "Clear. Commander." They fought for 9 hours in the broken city under the broken ice. Some of the Adia fought back. Most did not. The ones who fought, Roya's Marines killed, because there was no choice, and because the Itia had been killing humans for 2 months now, and there was nothing else to do. The ones who did not fight, the Marines herded into the ships. Builders, scientists, the small ones, and there were small ones, no larger than 10-year-old human children, with the same 2 wide gold eyes. They took the small ones first. Lisa Brennan personally carried 3 of them onto Albatross. They clung to her parka, and they made small sounds that the translator could not parse, and she carried them all the same. Vorsion of the long ice was in the central tower. Roya found it there. It was not running. It was sitting in a chair shaped for its body, watching the void through a window that had not, an hour ago, been open to space, and it turned to look at her when she came in. Its translator was still on its collar. "You came," it said. "Yes, how with a rock?" It seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, it nodded. It made a gesture with one massive hand that the translator did not render but which Roya understood somehow to be respect. "We did not expect this," it said. "We thought we had 3 centuries. We thought you were mammals. We are mammals, yes. But you are also something else." The gold eyes were steady. I have decided what you are." "What are we?" The Itia looked at her for a long moment. Then it said, "You are what we should have been. Before our sun began to die. Before we became a people who took what we needed." It stood. It was very tall. It looked down at her without anger. "Will you kill me, small commander?" "No," Roya said. "I'm taking you home, to die, to talk. There are more of you. On your old world, aren't there?" "Yes." "Then we are going to talk to them. And we are going to find a way for them to live somewhere that isn't here." She lowered the humming gun. "Because I am not going to be what you were." The idea stood there for a long time. Then, slowly, with great dignity, it lowered itself to one knee, and it bowed its head. She took it home in chains. It did not resist. The atmospheric processors at the poles, when she sent the codes, shut down one by one. The ones in Antarctica went last. Roya was patched into the live feed from McMurdo Station as the last great machine wound down. The cold winds began slowly to die. The melting did not reverse. The damage was the damage. The seas would not recede in her lifetime. But the bleeding stopped. The patient lived. They came home 8 months later. 3 ships left. 3 ships returned, with 38 humans aboard, and 170 Adia, mostly children, mostly builders. Crew had taught the small Adia to play cards on the return trip. The small Adia were, Frank reported, terrible cheats. Frank had taught them to cheat. He was very proud of this. Lisa Brennan slept on the return in a hammock she had strung in the cargo bay of Albatross next to where the Atia children slept. The children were afraid of the dark, actually afraid, in a way that was deeply and embarrassingly familiar, and they made a low, keening sound at night that the translator rendered as a request for their mothers. Their mothers, as far as anyone could determine, had been builders in the central tower and were dead. Lisa Brennan, who had lost a man named Henrik who was learning to whistle, sat in the dark with 3 blue-furred children, who were not her children, and who would never be her children. And she whistled. She whistled old standards. The children eventually stopped keening. Eventually, after a great many nights, two of them, the smallest two, learned to whistle back, badly, in a frequency that hurt the human ear, and Lisa Brennan would laugh in the dark of the cargo bay, and the children would laugh too. The laugh of a species that had not, until this moment, known it could laugh in front of humans. And somewhere on the bridge Frank Pulaski would hear it through the open comm, and would not say anything to anyone about why his eyes were wet. They held a parade in New Geneva when they landed. Roya hated it. She stood on the platform in the dress uniform she had not worn in 5 years. And she shook the hands she was supposed to shake, and she answered the questions she was supposed to answer. And when it was finally over, she went and found Frank Pulaski in the back of the hangar, sitting on a crate, drinking from the steel hip flask. He had refilled it, tea, still, because he had quit drinking the year his daughter was born. His daughter was waiting for him in the front of the hangar. She was 16 now. She had grown 9 centimeters while he was away. She had not yet seen him and he had not yet seen her, and he was sitting on a crate in the back of the hangar, drinking cold tea because he was, Roya understood without asking, terrified of his own child. Terrified that the man who had come back was not the man who had left, and that she would see this in his face the moment he turned toward her, and that he would not know what to say. She sat down beside him on the crate. He handed her the flask without speaking. She took a sip. Cold tea. It was awful. To Tenzin, she said. To Tenzin, Frank said. They sat there for a long time, in the quiet of the hangar, with the lights of New Geneva burning outside, and somewhere very far away, a mountain that did not exist anymore. An old man was still singing his grandfather's song, and the song was still holding up the sky. Roya thought about what Vorshin had said. You are what we should have been. She thought about Lisa Brennan carrying 3 small alien children onto a shuttle. She thought about Frank cheating at cards with creatures that had tried to drown her planet. She thought about her mother used to stitch initials into the collars of her clothes in green thread because her mother had believed that if you put a piece of yourself into a thing, the thing would always remember you, and you would never be lost. The idea had been a great people. They had built a city under the ice of Callisto and a city under the mountains of the Himalayas. And they had been a great people, and they had become small the way great peoples become small, by deciding that what they needed mattered more than what they would have to do to get it. Humanity was a small people. Humanity had always been a small people. It lived on one rock around a middling star, and it argued about borders drawn on melting maps, and it could not agree on how to share a planet with itself, let alone with anyone else. But when the sky had been bought and sold, a small woman from Karachi, and a refrigerator from Warsaw, and a climatologist from Reykjavik, and an old man from Bhutan had taken back the sky with a fusion battery, a song, and a rock. And when they had won, they had not taken what they needed. They had taken prisoners. They had taken children. They had brought them home, and they had taught them to play cards. And they had cheated. That, Roya thought, was the difference. That was the whole difference. That was, in the end, what humanity was. She finished the tea. She handed the flask back to Frank. Outside the hangar, the lights of the city were burning, and somewhere above the lights, in the dark, Gamma 1 was still turning, and below Gamma 1 the Earth was turning too, blue and white, the white in the right places again, or close enough. For now she stood up. She put a hand on Frank's shoulder. Your daughter is waiting, she said. Go, Roya. Go, Frank. She doesn't care what you say. She just wants you back. Children are simpler than we make them. Go. He stood. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. He squared his shoulders, the way she had seen him square them before, walking into rooms full of admirals and rooms full of enemies. And he walked across the hangar toward the small, thin girl, who was at that exact moment beginning to run. Roya watched them meet. She watched the girl bury her face in her father's coat. She watched Frank, who had cheated at cards with alien children, carried a flask of cold tea to the surface of an asteroid, who had handed that same flask to a dying old man on a mountain that did not exist anymore, kneel down in his dress uniform on the hangar floor and hold his daughter the way a drowning man holds a piece of wood. She turned away. She gave them that. She walked out into the city. The lights were on. The streets were dry. Somewhere on a balcony, somebody was playing an oud, badly, and laughing about it. Somewhere else a child was crying because it was past her bedtime. Somewhere else a parakeet, not Mithu. Mithu was gone. But somebody's parakeet, some other small green thing with a sharp little beak, was being told by its owner to please, for the love of God, shut up. It was, Roya thought, just a city, just an ordinary city, on an ordinary evening on an ordinary planet, that had nearly been taken and had not been taken, because 4 people had decided, in a stone room under a mountain, that it would not be. That was all. That was everything. She walked home.